Chapter 3. The Ligurians. Ringnick had been a Ligurian ranger for over 2 years. He joined with 4 other friends from his hometown. They had all known each other since childhood. They operated in the same ranger patrol squad during their years of service. The rangers were collecting and packing their gear. They were being dispatched to investigate some strange goings-on near the newly discovered Lost Valley. "Hey, Deertick, where's my runner's knife? Did you borrow it?" asked Ringnick as he pushed back his thick blonde hair. "Piss off," Deertick shouted with mirth shining in his blue eyes. "I told you how many times to leave my stuff alone?" asked Ringnick as he rummaged through Deertick's possessions, where he found his knife. "Here it is. I told you to return my stuff if you use it." "How did it get there?" challenged Deertick in a surprised voice. "When you two are done fighting, you can finish by kissing and making up," said their squad leader, Jekyll. "He would like that," said Deertick. "I would rather kiss a goat," said Ringnick. Finch threw a sock at Deertick. "Kiss that, D." The other 2 rangers in the group were Finch and Leaftuck, the courageous. Most rangers were wiry and slim of build, but Leaftuck was much larger. Ringnick was married 6 months ago. The wedding was glorious. His new wife, Lena, was known to all the rangers since childhood. Lena and Leaftuck had been intimate years before, but Lena had broken it off. Leaftuck was broken-hearted, but time had helped to heal the hurt. With that in the past, the rangers never talked about it, so as not to reopen any old wounds. Ringnick missed his wife and thought about her a lot on his trips with the rangers. On return trips, he was always light of foot, like a horse to a barn, eager to get home to the oats. It was the custom for some Ligurians from the rural parts of Liguria to combine part of their first and part of their last names into one. Their families were the Tegarths, Coles, Nikolauses, and Tukakovics, where Dirko Tegarth, J. Cole, Ringwalt Nikolaus, and Leafton Tukakovic became Deertick, J. Cole, Ringnick, and Leaftuck. Finch's family, the Kleins, had immigrated from the north and did not follow this custom. Their squad had been ordered to travel to the Lost Valley and investigate some new reports coming from that area about some trouble, but the reports had not made sense to the leadership. The ranger captains wanted some first-hand information. They finished packing their gear and began their march east towards the mountains using the new road that led to the Lost Valley. Their garrison was based out of Rhizon, the largest city in Liguria. It was known for its stout ale and earthy folk that were not very pretentious. Liguria was one of the smallest of the known nation-states. Their territories were in and around the mountains and the plains just north of Illyria. Illyria was the largest, wealthiest nation-state in the known world. The Ligurian rangers were famous for patrolling and keeping the region safe from vagabonds who might do harm or mischief. Until recently, things had been mostly quiet for the rangers, except for a few goat thieves and the usual trouble found on the borders of Liguria. However, things had not been their usual ever since the earthquake broke the mountains asunder, exposing the Lost Valley to the known world. Early explorers reported that a virtual paradise had been discovered. Soon people began settling in the valley, but there had been some stories about strange goings-on related to the new discovery. The rangers were being dispatched to investigate and keep the peace if necessary. "What is up with this trip?" asked Deertick. "Most likely opportunists are running roughshod over the new settlers in Lost Valley. The captain said they can't make sense of the reports. You know how people are, always seeing the boogeyman behind the tree. If I had a copper for every time we have had to investigate one of these. Next stop is Tenin. We might stay the night there, said Jekyll. At the Barefoot Lady? Asked Leaftuck. Yes, at the Barefoot Lady. You can have your black ale and time with the ladies if we get there early enough. But we must be up early tomorrow morning. There is a lot of pressure coming down from the top to get some information on this, and no one can be late, answered Jekyll. The group picked up its pace. Mountains lay not far beyond Tenin. Far above, blackbirds were flying eastward toward the mountains. There are ravens. Wonder what they're doing this far from the mountains, asked Finch. The rangers settled in and found a table in the bar at the Barefoot Lady. The crowd was light tonight. The rangers were hungry. Stew and bread were served, and they gobbled it down like hungry farmhands. At the table next to them, some locals had been talking. One of the men was getting a little drunk, a little excited, and loud. I am telling you that they have been disappeared, and other strange goings-on, said the man at the table. What have you seen? Asked Jekyll. I hear things and people talk. Aren't you guys rangers? Yes, Jekyll answered. Where the hell have you been? People are complaining, you know. Things aren't right since the mountains broke open. I can tell you that. Talk to Harmon here. He has seen something. Ain't that right, Harmon? It's right, slurred Harmon. He got up and stood nose to nose with Jekyll. Harmon's filthy clothes hung loosely over his large frame. He swayed a bit and stared angrily at Jekyll. You're drunk, spat Jekyll. I may be drunk, but I never weren't blind, I tell you that. And I seen those creatures, and I know what I seen. Jekyll pushed Harmon away with a look of disgust on his face. Nobody does that to me, spat Harmon as he pulled the knife and stepped forward. All the rangers jumped to their feet behind Jekyll, drawing their weapons. Harmon had a look of fear on his face. He stepped back and shifted his gaze back to the floor. Easy, boys, said Jekyll. Harmon sheathed his knife. As he turned away, grumbling something about rangers, then he stumbled out the front door, disappearing into the night. Further discussions with the locals revealed confused stories that didn't make much sense to the rangers, but one thing the rangers were sure about: they needed to head towards the mountains and perhaps visit the Lost Valley itself. The next day they started as the sun was rising. The rangers travelled mostly in silence. They were a little on edge from all the talk at the inn and were constantly scanning the horizon for anything that might present trouble. The green grasses of the plains gave way to the pines of the foothills as they neared the mountains. The mountains loomed large and steep before them. Their peaks looked like frozen, jagged knife edges along their tops. Those mountains were so steep they kept the Lost Valley secret for years. It took the earthquake to reveal what had been hidden behind the foreboding peaks. If men had not known of its existence, nothing much would have changed, as access was almost impossible across such formidable barriers as these. The rangers came upon a farmhouse with a small barn and some fields behind the house. They had heard a farmer yelling in some distress. The rangers picked up the pace. As they walked around the house, they saw the farmer. "Those damned rat-nags are back again! Foul creatures, not natural!" yelled the farmer. Jekyll spoke. "What are rat-nags?" "Foul blackbirds. I see them fly over. They have grabbed and flown off with stuff." "But we don't see any birds. Where are they?" asked Jekyll. "You can't see what I can see," sneered the farmer. The farmer pointed. "Look there, flying just over those trees." Everyone looked where he pointed. There were some large blackbirds flying just over the trees heading east. "Looks like it might be ravens," said Jekyll. "No, I'm telling you, ranger boys don't know nothing about nothing. There was a dead cat and some cut brush, and they tore up the cat and took it, and some of the other," said the farmer. The rangers bid the farmer farewell and continued down the road. "Ravens are carrion eaters," said Jacob. "They carry off stuff. Sometimes they carry off shiny things," said Finch. "I think the guy's overreacting. He seems to be a little unhinged to me," said Deertig. "People are spooked by all the talk," said Leaftuck. "We will not jump to any conclusions until we know more," said Jacob. Rangers were given many different types of missions, but often their missions were to travel the countryside, keeping the peace. These trips often required them to be away from home for extended periods. They mostly travelled by foot, and no terrain seemed too rough for them to venture into. They carried all their own gear and supplies, resupplying as needed in towns along the way. Their foodstuffs included mostly dried meats, dried barley, bread, and beans. Beans were a luxury, really, because they had to prepare them on a fire. Fires were not often practical to make, and time didn't always allow for cooking. Last night they had beans and dried bread for dinner. As they marched down the road, Deertig released gas as he went. The sound of the odoriferous release was accompanied by a trumpeting reverberation. The air is foul," said Finch, frowning. Finch was marching directly behind Deertig. Finch and Leaftuck took off at a jog and passed by Deertig. "You know what they say about beans being good for your heart," said Deertig. "Let's pick up the pace, boys," said Jacob. The rangers began travelling at a light jog, and were known to be able to travel great distances in one day, if needed. At dusk, when they arrived at their camping site, the young rangers eyed the lay of the land for the best place to sleep. From the experience of so many outings, they could immediately spot where to throw down their sleeping gear, and this camp was no exception. Deertig, Finch, and Leaftuck made a mad dash for the best spot. The three of them collided in a running frenzy and tumbled to the ground, with Finch leaping and diving over the pack, landing with his hand on the now highly coveted camping spot. "This one's mine," he shouted. Back in Rison, Rignick's wife, Lena, was visiting with Emma, who was married to Finch. Emma and Finch had 3 kids that were ages 2, 4, and 7. Lena had stopped by to see how Emma and the kids were doing. "How are things?" asked Lena. "Oh, okay, I guess," said Emma, looking down. "What's wrong?" "Our husbands are gone again. These out-of-town trips are wearing on me. I worry, and now especially with the rumours we keep hearing. I'm sure you miss yours too. You've only been married 6 months. 6 days can seem like an eternity when you're separated." "It does seem like a long time, but I knew what I was getting into when we got married. Issa told me yesterday that the farm folk of Ristown have seen strange things," said Lena. "Oh, you don't really believe that, do you?" asked Emma. "I don't know what to believe. The earthquake has people afraid, but maybe there were things in the Lost Valley that got out when it opened up. I'm not taking the word of some farmer from Ristown, drunken on dark ale, shouting in a pub. I need to hear it from someone I can trust." "I hope our guys are okay," said Lena quietly. At the ranger camp, the men were setting up for the night when Finch made a discovery just outside the edge of camp. "Who left a turd by the cedar tree?" yelled Finch. "I nearly stepped in it. Whose is it?" "Deertig?" "Well, my stomach didn't feel so good from those beans," said Deertig. "You are supposed to bury them," said Jacob. "I didn't have time to dig a hole," said Deertig sheepishly. "Then dig it afterwards and bury it then," said Jacob. "Hey, there are some turds over here too. These are big ones." "Thank the gods of the cold sea I didn't step in it," yelled out Leaftuck. "Whose are these then?" "Not mine," the others said almost in unison. They were not prone to lying to each other about such trivial matters, as whose turd it was anyway. "Those big turds stink really bad. A strange smell, too. If it isn't one of ours, I wonder who it belongs to. Not many people around these parts," said Jacob. There would be no beans for the rangers tonight. Deertig's stomach would be thankful, and so would Finch, who normally marched behind Deertig. They had seen the newly formed canyon ahead of them as they entered the foothills of the mountains. Tomorrow they would make for the canyon. This was uncharted territory for the rangers. With the rising sun, the rangers broke camp and began marching east. The canyon they entered had steep, sheer, vertical walls. The canyon was mostly barren of any vegetation in that it had been recently formed, and there had been no time for new growth. Reports from the Lost Valley were that it had ancient old-growth forests that were untouched by man through the known history of time. The Lost Valley held a newly formed settlement. The settlers had named it Dieter's Town. The rangers threw stones to practice their aim while they hiked. They picked a target and announced it so each of them could see how well they did when they threw. Deertig picked up a stone and tossed it up and down in his hand to get the feel of it, the weight of it. This one seemed just right. "The second rock to the right of the red boulder, just there," Deertig pointed. Deertig dashed forward and threw sidearm across his body. The rock hissed through the air with speed, but landed a little to the left of the target. Some brown birds nearby scattered to the winds at the sound of the rock hitting the hillside. "I didn't see those birds," thought Deertig. "Luckily I didn't hit one by accident." "You missed again," said Leaftuck. "Still way better than yours," replied Deertig. Admittedly so, thought Leaftuck, but he wouldn't give Deertig the satisfaction of admitting it, as he was already so full of himself. "So, Ringnick, it has been 6 months since you were married. Are there any kids in the works?" asked Finch, who was married with 3 of his own. "Yeah, Ringnick, what about it? The oracle gave good omens at the wedding. Didn't she say you would have a son? So what's keeping you?" interrupted Deertig. Ringnick blushed a little. "There is plenty of time for that. Anyway, what's the rush?" he replied, turning away, focusing his attention on the path in front of them. The newly formed canyon finally gave way to the open grass plains of the Lost Valley. The rangers openly gasped at what they saw. It was a scene of great beauty, lush grasses dancing in the breeze, and dark forests bordered the horizon to the east, and to the south there were painted colors of the desert. Strange great brown beasts grazed in the grassy plains. Deer and elk foraged serenely in the distance, and above, birds of all colors filled the skies. And from one end of the valley to the other, massive craggy mountains rose up to kiss the sky. The rangers stood in amazement, staring at what lay before them. Ligurians held worship services on mountain tops, and this whole area appeared to be perfectly suited for worship, a wondrous sight to behold. Their silence filled the air. For a few moments they were in that quiet place that lay between thoughts, words, and the worlds. All that existed in that quiet place was that which always was. This was a spiritual moment for them that took their breaths away. The rangers reluctantly turned their attention back to the road ahead of them and resumed their journey, feeling a little sad because the moment had passed. When the rangers arrived in Dieter's Town, their first stop was to visit the local village constable. Upon entering the village, the rangers noticed that there were no walls protecting it. Most cities in the modern world had walls of stone. This village mostly consisted of newly constructed primitive wooden structures. The rangers stepped into the constable's office. The office had a couple of rough hand-hewn wooden chairs situated along 2 walls, a few short swords and shields hanging on the other wall, and a small locked door in the back that might be used to hold prisoners. The room stank of stale air. "We are rangers sent from Rhizon. We're looking for the local constable?" queried Jekyll. "I'm Otto, the local constable. Where the hell have you rangers been? You young'uns are all they sent us? I have been requesting help and have heard nothing from Rhizon while things here get worse and worse. People are disappearing and we can't find them anywhere. There are reports of strange creatures of all kinds being seen, flying ones, crawling ones, and walking ones. The west side of the valley is being destroyed. Everything there is gone. Trees are gone, and every living thing is ripped out and has disappeared. Hell, there are settlers whose entire homes have vanished without a trace. Livestock, fencing, barns, trees, shrubs, you name it, it's all gone. I don't mind telling you that people are downright scared. Well, now that you are here, what do you intend to do about it?" "My name is Jekyll," said Jekyll, stepping forward. "It is nice to meet you, Constable. Admittedly, my rangers are young, but they are competent and already have plenty of field experience under their belts. My commanders may be late in responding, but frankly, the stories have been a little hard to believe. We are here to find out what the problem is. Tomorrow, if you can provide a guide to show us to the trouble spots, then we will check it out." "I'll do you one better. I'll provide a guide and I will go with you myself. It is high time we get to the bottom of this," sneered the constable. "We will get a room for the night, get some food and a good night's sleep. Does tomorrow's first light work for you?" asked Jekyll. "Yes, it does. See you here. You boys don't be late." In the morning, everyone gathered at the constable's office. Otto was there with several other men and a few women. "I have asked some of the lads to join us today." The constable gestured to the other men. "About time someone showed up," yelled out one of the constable's lads. "Yeah, that's right," echoed a few others. Jekyll assessed the group. The men all had a lightweight sack or pack, a small to medium-sized lightweight shield, and a short sword, wooden club, or javelin. These people were the early settlers of this newly discovered area, who were accustomed to travelling the outdoors and used to a rougher life, to be sure. These were not the timid folk found in the big cities. "Okay," Jekyll nodded. "We don't normally travel with citizens, but given the strange nature of this, I will make an exception. But first, I want to make sure we have an understanding that I am in charge, and my second is Ringnick," he said as he pointed to Ringnick. "Okay, Ranger Jekyll," said the constable, nodding. "Jacob here will take us to the first area. There are several others after that." The women joined the men and said their goodbyes. Emotions were running high among the women. Rumours and gossip had lit fires of fear, like a dry wind fire racing up a droughted hillside. A plump, rosy-cheeked lass hugged the constable, holding back tears as she did. Then she said resolutely, "Return with your shield, or on it." "Return with your shield, or on it," said a few of the other women to the men. The constable's men and the rangers marched westward from the village. The rangers had to slow their pace as the villagers could not keep up with them. The Lost Valley was incredibly beautiful. A crystal-clear mountain stream ran from north to south, splitting the valley mostly in two. The clear air smelt sweet with a faint hint of pine. The village was situated along the stream. To the north and east stood an old-growth forest, more ancient than any known to the modern world. To the south and west, a high desert. To the west were plains, and on the horizon, as far as the eye could see, were mountain-tops. Before the earthquake, this valley was completely cut off from the outside world, leaving it more pristine than any others they had seen before. Some of the constable's men were humming a song as they marched. Jekyll took the time to question the constable. "Constable, what have you seen?" "Well, I've been tied up in the village most of the time. I'm taking the people's word that there are strange goings-on, but some of them say that they have seen creatures that appear disfigured or deformed in some dark way. I don't know what to make of this myself, but I'm not afraid to find out, which we will do if I have anything to say about it." The group stopped for lunch. The weather was perfect. The air was fresh and clean, unlike that of the cities where garbage and human waste were often found lying about. Here the grasses rippled in the winds. The shadows cast by the puffy clouds left dark patterns across the top of the grass, standing in stark contrast next to where the sun shone brightly. The wind created ripples across the grassy field that looked like waves going across the cold sea. It was relaxing to watch and provided the men with some relief from the stressful situation they faced. Most of these settlers migrated from Rhizon, the capital of Liguria. Like many of their fellow Ligurians, the constable's lads were farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen. These were not men accustomed to taking up arms, but their resolve had overcome their fear, and they were ready to do what they had been called upon to do. They knew all too well the hardship that would befall their women and children should they not return from this trip. In truth, most of them feared more for their families than they did for themselves. After lunch, the march continued westward. The rangers could have covered the ground much more quickly had they not been encumbered by the slower lot among them. At one point, Jacob waved to the group to leave the road. They followed closely behind, and they came upon a clearing. They saw a freshly cut road that travelled westward from the clearing. Even the grasses were torn up, cut, or plucked from the earth. Strange. This is stark and lifeless, thought Jekyll. Their guide, Jacob, stood in the middle and said, "In this very spot was Farmer Paul's house and barn, where he and his family lived. They and all their belongings are gone. The road to the west is new, and we don't know who built it. We will follow it for a time. I want you to see what lies beyond." They travelled to the west, and eventually the woods opened into fields. As far as the eye could see was total desolation. The land had been stripped clean of all life. Just dirt remained, aside from an occasional sprig. The rangers had never seen anything like this. No one had an explanation. The light grew dim as the sun passed behind the mountains. Long, dark shadows stretched out across the barren landscape. Black birds, perhaps ravens, were flying westward in the skies above. The rangers pitched camp far off the new road. They hoped not to be surprised by any travellers in the night. There were no jokes or frolicking about from the rangers, who took on a more sombre tone than they had on the trip to the Lost Valley. Guards were selected and guard shifts were set up by Jekyll. As they prepared for the evening meal, some of the group sat around the fire and chatted. The moon was partially full, providing just enough light to see by. A few hours after everyone had settled in for the evening, shouting came from the West Guard. He came running into the camp, frantic and scared. Jekyll was on his feet, and he grabbed the guard by the shoulders as he entered the camp, saying, "Calm down. Tell us what's going on." "I saw them coming up the road. Something is really bad wrong with them. They ain't natural." "How many?" asked Jekyll. "Maybe half a dozen. Strange creatures, one of them on all fours. Some carrying axes. Looked like a wagon with some great beast pulling it." "Okay, everyone, gather up and come to arms. We are going to find out what is going on. Quickly now, prepare a couple of torches to light the way." The rangers typically travelled lightly to enable them to move more quickly. Their weapons of choice were short swords and medium to small-sized shields, which allowed them to remain nimble and fleet of foot. As they moved towards the road, they heard the creaking of a wagon. J. signaled the group to quickly move to the east along the road. At a point they turned and stepped onto the road. They could hear a wagon approaching. In the partially moonlit night, they thought they could make out some shapes coming towards them. No voices came from anyone, not a peep. There was a strange smell on the wind. J. moved the rangers to the front of the group, where they stood 3 abreast with 2 behind. J. Dietig, and Leaftuck stood shoulder to shoulder at the front. The shapes emerged from the darkness into their torchlight. The view left the rangers and lads confused and frightened. Before them were creatures standing on 2 legs like humans, wearing dirt and tattered clothing, and carrying stone axes with wooden handles. Their skin was rough and mottled with greenish-grey hue. One had a clubbed arm, and another a clubbed foot. Their eyes were wide and wild-looking with a strange yellow colour, like that of a wolf. Pulling the cart was a massive, deformed, hairy beast with a head like a buffalo. The head was about as wide as the length of one axe handle. Standing amongst the 2-legged beings was a 4-legged, mangy creature with spotty, thinning hair like a diseased dog or wolf. Its fangs were showing, with yellow saliva foaming at its mouth. "Goblins!" yelled one of the lads. Groans of surprise and fear broke out. "Stand firm!" yelled Jekyll. Before Jekyll could get out a word of introduction, the creatures charged the group at a dead run. The rangers drew their weapons. At the head of the charge was the massive beast pulling the wagon, and on each side of the wagon were 2 goblins. Slinking low, the canine creature moved off into the shadows. As they got closer, the smell became putrid and noxious. "Give way! Move to the side of the road!" shouted Jekyll. The rangers split to each side, and the lads followed suit. The beast's thunderous hooves bore down upon them, narrowly missing. As the goblins came upon them, the rangers raised their swords and shields. At a run, the lead goblin swung an axe at Jekyll. Jekyll ducked, and the axe rushed through the air over his head and crashed into the side of the wagon. Leaftuck, the next man down the line from Jekyll, swung his sword with all his might and severed the axe arm from the goblin. The constable was next in line and brought his sword down on the chest of the goblin. He thought he could see something like a dark cloud puff out from the mouth of the creature. The constable coughed. "How could they still be running?" thought Jekyll. "This is unnatural." Dietig, who was followed by Ringnick and Fench, stood on the opposite side of the wagon where 2 more goblins rushed forward and bore down on them. The first goblin swung his axe as he ran. Dietig raised and angled his shield. The goblin's axe ricocheted off the top of Dietig's shield, then turned sideways and bounced off the wagon. Ringnick thrusted his sword through the head of the goblin. The force exerted by the forward momentum of the running goblin tore the sword from Ringnick's hand. Fench took a step back to dodge the goblin as it span out of control and crashed into the brush, with the sword sticking out of one eye and through the back of its head. Then Fench recovered and swung his sword with his full might, cleaving the head off the second goblin. The headless goblin also spun out of control and crashed into the brush, where it lay twitching. A man was heard screaming at the back of the group of lads. The canine creature was upon one of them. The man was down, desperately trying to protect himself with his arms as the creature attacked him savagely from above. The lads struck terrible blows to the creatures as they went by, yet they kept running, disappearing into the night. Everyone, breathing hard, stood in shocked silence. What had just happened? Could this be real? Creatures in the night, sustaining blows that would stop a man, yet they keep running. This was something unnatural, thought Jekyll. "Who is hurt?" shouted Jekyll. The lads in the back said they had a man down. "I think he's dead," said one of them. "Anyone else?" All was quiet. They examined the slain creatures. The creatures had a foul smell. "That creature smells as bad as one of Dear Tig's turds we found in the camp the other day," complained Leaftuck. "That big one wasn't mine," objected Dear Tig, shaking his head. They examined one of the downed creatures more closely. The creature barely bled. Its blood was thick, and other parts were dry and sort of powdery on the inside places. The group discussed their next course of action. They mostly agreed that they needed to press the advantage achieved by winning their conflict. A few of the lads had seen enough and wanted to go back home, but they were too afraid to venture out on their own and thought better of it. Finally, Jekyll stepped forward. "We need to bury the dead man. Post guard again and get some rest. We start early at first light." The sky glowed dimly, with a burnt orange hue as the sun began to rise. Everyone in the camp began to stir. Jekyll noticed a few lads were standing around the constable. He moaned softly on the ground under his wool blanket. "What's wrong with him?" asked Jekyll. "He was up most of the night, coughing with some sort of sickness," said one of the lads. The constable was a pale, ashen colour. "Not sure he can travel," said another. "Okay, one of you boys stay here with him. We will pick you up on the way back if he doesn't get better." "Maybe it was something he ate," Jekyll suggested. The group resumed the journey westward along the newly formed dirt road. There were skid marks on the road, as if entire trees had been dragged along it. The mountains loomed in the distance, their massive peaks hidden among the clouds. The Ligurians built forts on hilltops for defence. They were very at home in the mountains, and the Ligurians had a reputation for being as nimble as goats. The lads that settled here in the Lost Valley were Ligurians. They were mostly farming folk and not well trained for battle. By afternoon, they were close enough to see the mountains clearly and to make out where the road entered them. They stopped on a rolling hillside for a meal of dried meat and barley cakes, observing the view in front of them. They could see down and across the valley, all the way up to the base of the steep mountains. "I can see two figures at the mouth of a cave down there," said Dear Tig, as he pointed out across the valley. "Me too," agreed Leaftuck and Finch. "From appearances, the new road goes directly to that cave," Jekyll pointed out. While the rangers discussed their options, a commotion broke out from behind them. "There! Look there! It's the constable!" said one of the lads excitedly. Off to one side, they could see the constable running down the hillside towards the cave. "What the... By the gods of the cold sea! What is he doing?" said Jekyll. "Where's he going?" said Dear Tig. He yelled out, "Constable! Constable, here! We're over here!" But the constable either couldn't hear them or was ignoring them as he continued to run down the hillside. "He can't take them on by himself. What is wrong with that fool? If those are goblins down there, he will be killed," said Ringneck. The group watched as he crossed the field, and they quickly grabbed their gear for a pursuit. They began moving down the road. The constable was now in the distance, running towards the cave. When the constable reached the cave entrance, he disappeared inside, with two figures following just behind him. The rangers and lads pressed forward across the valley and came upon the cave entrance. It was dark and quiet. "Dear Tig and Leaftuck, strike a torch and we'll go in first. The lads are to follow," said Jekyll. With the torches lit, they entered the cave. It was a little warmer than they expected, and the smell was atrocious. "Ugh, it smells like one of Dear Tig's turds in here," Leaftuck said through a grimace. "That wasn't one of mine," objected Dear Tig under his breath. "Shh," whispered Jekyll quietly. "Listen and look." As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they could see just beyond the cave entrance. Piles of cut-down trees and a few dead animals lay in heaps. It looked like some mushrooms were growing among the piles. Standing in the back of the shadows, barely visible, were two goblins. They appeared to have the shape of a woman, but with rough, mottled, greenish-grey skin like the others. "What is this?" asked Dietig. The two female goblins dashed into the darkness and vanished from sight. Shuffling footsteps emanated from the darkness just beyond the torchlight. "Constable, is that you?" shouted out Jacol. All was quiet, except for the sound of their breathing. "You there in the dark! Announce yourself!" shouted Jacol. Two goblins carrying stone axes with wooden handles appeared from the darkness. "Announce yourself!" demanded Jacol. The two goblins took off at a dead run towards the rangers. A couple of the lads gasped and stepped back in fear. "Stand your ground and pass the torches back to mid-group," ordered Jacol. The torches were handed back, and the rangers drew their weapons and raised their shields to chest height. Finch, Dietig, and Ringnick were at the head of the group to meet the oncoming goblins. While they ran, the two goblins raised their axes. As they came upon the rangers, they both swung them. The first goblin's axe missed as it passed below Finch's shield, but the second goblin's axe struck Dietig's shield on the side and caught part of his shield arm, and he groaned in pain. All three goblins rocked back on their feet from the force of the goblins crashing into them. The rangers gained their balance and brought their swords to bear. Finch swung his sword but missed wide of the mark. Dietig landed on the goblin's hip in a swiping, cutting blow, and Ringnick's blow pierced a goblin's shoulder. In return, both goblins swung their axes and they bounced off the rangers' shields. "These blows aren't working! Aim for their heads!" shouted Jacol. Ringnick's sword thrust up and through one of the goblins' heads. The other two rangers landed blows on the shoulder and through the hip of the other goblin. The goblin with the head wound staggered back, and death spiraled onto the ground. The second goblin's axe swung wildly, missing altogether. The three rangers focused on the last goblin standing and swung their swords. Dietig's swing missed. The other blow struck the side of the goblin, but almost no blood came from the wounds. There was another axe blow from a goblin into Dietig's shield, which again ricocheted down to his arm. "Ah!" He winced and yelled out in pain, dropping his shield to the ground. The rangers raised their swords and swung them. Finch put a sword through a goblin's eye. Dietig landed a blow on the goblin's axe arm, cleaving it off, and Ringnick severed off the head of a goblin. The goblin crumpled to the ground. The group stood in the quiet of the cave, hearing only the sound of the rangers' heavy breathing. Dietig picked up his shield and slung it over his shoulder. Finch quickly wrapped Dietig's arm where it was bruised and bleeding. "Jacol, what is going on here?" asked Dietig. "I don't know. This is outside of my experience. We have to get this information back to Rhizon so they can know of the danger," said Jacol. "What is that sound?" asked Dietig in a quiet whisper. Everyone listened and strained to hear. At the edge of their perception, they began to hear it too, like the sound of many feet marching. The sound was getting louder and louder. "Lads, start backing up," said Jacol. Jacol got no complaints from the lads as they were glad to be getting out of there. The group moved steadily backwards towards the cave entrance when two massive hairy beasts burst into the torchlight. They moved on all fours, and their hairy forearms were as big as a man's thigh. They had large claws on their front feet and huge mouths filled with gnashing teeth, dripping with yellow saliva. Right behind the big creatures were goblins that went back as far as the eye could see. Backing up, Finch, Dietig, and Ringnick were still inside the cave when the enormous creatures crashed down upon them. The rangers raised their shields just as huge, hairy forearms landed powerful blows that rocked the rangers backwards, almost off their feet. Outside the cave, J-Cole had heard a sound from above and looked up to see a wagon-sized boulder coming down towards them. He pushed Leaf-Tuck and one of the lads out of the way, yelling, "Back!" as the boulder dropped down upon them. Leaf-Tuck and the lad fell out of the path and were narrowly missed by the boulder. The boulder landed on J-Cole with a crushing sound, and there he lay, the lower half of his body pinned beneath it. Inside the cave, rangers heard a thud, followed by screams of pain. Hounded by the continued onslaught, the three rangers stepped backwards, surprisingly into an immense boulder which wasn't there mere moments before. "We're trapped," thought Ringnick in a panic. Fench, Deertig and Ringnick were in partial darkness, the cave lit only by the gaps around the edges of the boulder, which now rested in the cave's entrance. There was a momentary pause in the battle, where dust was seen floating in the rays of light that shone through the gaps around the boulder. The rangers struck back with their might. Fench's blow glanced off the shoulder of one of the beasts. Deertig, swinging wildly, missed his mark, but Ringnick struck a blow that pierced the eye of one of the large creatures. The creature roared with a dry, hoarse sound as it fell back upon the goblins with Ringnick's sword still protruding from its head. The goblins were knocked back from the force of the big creature as it fell. "Slip out through the gaps," commanded Ringnick. The rangers, nimble as goats, shot through the gaps. Now swordless, Ringnick was last to go out, with only his shield in hand. He blocked a series of blows with his shield as they pursued him. Once Ringnick slipped through, the creature tried to follow, but was too large to move through the gap. When Ringnick emerged from the partial darkness, he could see the lads fighting goblins in the back of the group. More goblins must have come out of the hills, Ringnick thought. This isn't going well. Several of the lads are down. Then he noticed the rangers on their knees in a group. J-Cole, blood seeping from the corner of his mouth, was protruding from under the boulder. "Ringnick, get everyone out of here," J-Cole said, coughing. "Get back," he gasped, "and tell what happened here." "We can't leave you," shouted Ringnick. Deertig and Fench jumped up and began thrusting their swords into the gaps on the sides of the boulder as goblins tried to push their way through. Leaf-Tuck moved to the back of the group to help the lads who were fighting the goblins. The sounds of axes echoed from his shield as he joined the fight. "I'm not going to make it," J-Cole said, spitting blood. "You can't ask this of me," shouted Ringnick with tears forming in his eyes. "You're my second," J-Cole said and spat again. Gathering his last strength, he hissed, "I command you." His head dropped to one side. The light in his eyes flickered out as he laboured to breathe. "Gather up! Move out!" shouted Ringnick. "What about J-Cole?" yelled back Deertig. "I am his second, and I am commanding you to move out," yelled Ringnick. "We are leaving him behind?" asked Fench. "There is no time to discuss it further. I have my orders. Move," yelled Ringnick. Leaf-Tuck had slain another goblin, and several more were still fighting. The group began moving away. Some of the lads were trying to drag their dead along. Ringnick tapped them on the shoulder as he went by, saying, "Leave them here." Then Ringnick shouted, "Pick up the pace! Move!" The group went up the hillside at a grueling pace. The scene of carnage faded further and further behind them. Once at the top of the hill, they stopped to catch their breath and watch and listen. They could hear hammers on rock below. "They will break up the boulder and clear the way for those things to be released," said Leaf-Tuck. "We are going to head south to the main road and then west back to Rhizone," said Ringnick. "We're not going back for J-Cole," said Leaf-Tuck with his jaw clenched as he pushed into Ringnick's face. "He saved my life down there. He pushed me out the way before the boulder struck, or it would have killed me. I owe him." "He didn't make it. He's gone. There's nothing we can do for him now. We go back to Rhizon to report what we have seen. Those are our orders, said Ringnick. To Hades with you, Leaftuck yelled, pushing Ringnick away. The lads can go back home from here. They can return the way we came in by following the new road to our last campsite. They need to look for the lad that was left with the constable and take him back home with them, said Ringnick. One of the lads had become ill, coughing and burning up with fever. The other lads were going to have to carry him. This was going to slow them down on their way home to Dieterstown. The rangers and the lads said their goodbyes and parted ways. It was silent as the rangers travelled back to Rhizon. No one spoke a word. When they reached the township of Tenin, Ringnick checked them into the Barefoot Lady and went to the pub alone, where he ordered dark ale. In his mind, he could see Jekyll lying there. The image kept repeating over and over. He couldn't stop seeing it. He slammed his fist on the table, but it didn't help. When he returned from the pub, he stumbled into their room at the Barefoot Lady. You've been drinking, Leaftuck accused Ringnick. Is none of your business, slurred at Ringnick as he pushed Leaftuck back. They struggled for a moment. Disgusted, Leaftuck stepped back and Ringnick fell forward to the ground, where he lay until morning light. The rangers travelled another day in silence and arrived back at the ranger's station late in the day. Ringnick stood before the grizzled, grey-bearded captain to give his report. The captain was still very fit, but reaching old age was not common, as people tended to die young due to the harsh living they were subjected to. What kind of crazy stories are you telling me? Interrupted Captain Alexander. It is all true, said Ringnick, and the other rangers nodded in agreement. Where in Hades is Jekyll? Yelled Alexander. Jekyll didn't make it, said Ringnick quietly. What happened? Asked Alexander. We were ambushed in a... stammered Ringnick, looking down. In a goblin cave. They cast a boulder down upon us, and he was fatally injured. He saved Leaftuck's life. He died a hero. I will contact his family tomorrow. Each of you will have to come in for questioning. The other captains will want to hear this firsthand, said Alexander. The funeral for Jekyll was held 2 days later. Typically, people are buried with stone markers. Rangers, or others of distinguished service, are burnt in a funeral pyre. Their bones are then collected and buried with a marker, but Jekyll never returned. His service began with a funeral pyre containing some of his clothing. The flames burned hot as the onlookers watched in silence. Afterward, people joined in the cemetery for words that were spoken in remembrance. Jekyll died a hero, giving his life for others as his last act. The Ligurians bestow their highest honours on those who died in this way. The sculptor who was commissioned to provide the memorial stone was announced. The rangers, Fench, Dietig, Ringnick, and Leaftuck, held their heads low and shed silent tears for their brother, as did others. At the end of the ceremony, the rangers blew the ram's horn. When it was finished, the priest stepped forward and said loudly, "The dead are not dead. They are alive somewhere. The dead are not dead. They are alive somewhere," everyone repeated in unison. Lena knocked on Emma's door and let herself in. "Are you home? It's me, Lena." Emma emerged from a back room. "How you doing, Lena?" Seeing the look on her face, she asked, "What's wrong?" Lena was in tears at this point. "I think I am with child." "Does anyone know? Have you told Ringnick yet?" "No, she started, sobbing. "Things haven't been the same since he returned from the Lost Valley. He has taken up drinking. I can't get him to talk about it. I don't know what to do." "Please, sit down. Let's talk. Would you like some hot tea?" asked Emma. Lena nodded. "What is going on at home?" asked Emma. "Ring Nick has become sullen. He just sits around and does nothing. At night he thrashes around and moans in his sleep, and now he drinks all the time. Even during the day when I come home, he is drunk. He has missed some of his ranger patrols. I think this is because of what happened to J-Cole. He feels responsible. The other rangers have blamed him for it, and their relationships have soured. Finch won't talk about it either. It must have been terrible. He told me Leaf Tuck had been really hard on Ring Nick, and Deertick has become distant. I remember not so long ago at your wedding, when they celebrated as brothers. It was so much fun. They grew up together and have known each other all their lives. This is a shame." "What has happened?" said Emma. "When do you intend to tell Ring Nick about the baby?" "When the time is right. I'm just not ready. He is suffering terribly and won't talk to me," said Lena, with tears in her eyes again. "I want to go for a walk and clear my head. You be careful if you do. Let me know if there is anything I can do for you." "Okay," said Lena, as she walked out the door. Later that evening, Ring Nick was finishing a bottle of dark ale when he noticed the sun was starting to dip down on the horizon. "Where is Lena?" he thought. "She should be home by now." As time passed and the sun set, Ring Nick became very concerned. Real fear set in. Where is she? He tried to remember what she said when she left, but he was drinking at the time and was in a fog. Going to the market. Food? Cobblers, potters, Emma's. That sounded vaguely right. In the kitchen, there was a stone tablet that they wrote notes on. He wrote a note for Lena, in case she returned before he did. The note said, "Gone to Emma's, looking for you." Emma and Finch heard a knock on the door. Finch answered it. There, to his surprise, stood Ring Nick. "You've been drinking," accused Finch. "Have you seen Lena? She hasn't come home," Ring Nick asked. "No," said Finch. "Who's that?" asked Emma, unable to see their guest from another room. "It's me," said Ring Nick. "Have you seen Lena?" "Yes, she was here today," said Emma, rounding the corner with a worried look on her face. "Hasn't she returned home?" "No." "Oh my," said Emma in shock. "She told me she was going for a walk when she left here today." "Where did she go?" asked Ring Nick, his eyes wide with concern. "She didn't say, just for a walk." "We have to form a search team," said Finch. "I'll rouse the rangers. Meet at the station. We can put the word out and get more rangers." "No, I'm going to start looking now. I will begin at the market," said Ring Nick as he turned, his shoulder just catching the edge of the doorway due to his drunkenness. Then he disappeared into the night. Ring Nick headed out into the dark of the night. After he searched the empty marketplace, he left the city to the north and east of Rhizone, since the closest mountains were in that direction. He stumbled through the darkness all night. He saw and heard nothing. At the station, the rangers had gathered. "Where is Ring Nick?" asked Deertick. "He is out looking," Finch said, a concerned look on his face. "Is he drunk again?" Leaf Tuck said with a frown. "The on-duty squad is ready to help," followed up Finch. "We can send them to the east side, and we can cover the west side. More rangers will be available in the morning. We can marshal the whole garrison." The next morning the rangers gathered at the station to report. The on-duty day shift was arriving. There had been no sign of Lena the previous night. The rangers had never stopped searching for her. "Has there been any sign of Ring Nick?" asked Deertick. "No one has seen him," said Captain Alexander, stepping into the room. "We are going to start a major search. We will send rangers in every direction with orders to return by evening and report. Rangers will go to the markets to ask questions to see if anyone saw anything. Pass the word. Everyone is to report outside, and we will make the assignments." The rangers completed their search and met in the evening as they had been ordered to do. Another day's search had turned up nothing. One group of rangers did catch some thieves lifting wares from a shop in the market. They brought them back to put in the prison cells. They were a pitiful bunch with teeth and hair in terrible condition due to the ravages of hunger. They seemed to be happy they were getting a decent meal. "Has there been any sign of Ringnick?" asked Dietig at the meeting. "No one has seen him," said Captain Alexander. "We can't worry about him right now. He can take care of himself. I want every man except the night shift to get a good night's sleep and show up tomorrow morning for another search. I am going to assign squads to travel the main roads to look for her." There was a commotion at the front door of the station. Ringnick had arrived. He looked bedraggled at best. His clothes were torn in places from the encounters with thickets in the wild. "Ringnick, what did you find?" asked the captain. "I did not find her, and she did not turn up at home," said Ringnick. "I am going to assign 8 squads to go in 8 directions. Ringnick, you need to go home and get some sleep." "No, sir. I will not stop looking until I can't take another step." "I can see your resolve. In that case, you will be in charge of your squad." Ringnick's squad was given the northwest direction to search. All squads were given orders to travel a day's distance from Rhizone as fast as they could and look for any signs, asking people along the way as to what they may have seen. "Where are you going?" asked Leaftuck. "We are heading to the village of Folda," replied Ringnick. "That is northeast of Rhizone. That is off our ordered path." "Why there?" asked Finch. "This has something to do with the goblins. I can feel it," stated Ringnick. "Oh no, we aren't bucking orders. You are in enough trouble as it is," said Leaftuck. "You heard the captain. I'm in charge. Out here, you answer to me," said Ringnick. "I am not getting busted for going against the captain's direct orders," said Dietig. Leaftuck looked at Finch. "Finch? I'm with them." "Stay with orders," said Finch. Ringnick lunged at Finch and grabbed his front collars with both hands and shook him. "Damn it! It isn't your wife out there, it's mine!" The group was tensely quiet. Finch looked at Ringnick. "Okay, Ringnick, you go to Folda. We will go north and west. If you don't get yourself killed out there, we will cover for you when we get back." Ringnick turned and kicked the ground as he walked away from the group, angry and disgusted. The rangers were all back in 2 days, except for Ringnick. "Where in Hades is Ringnick?" yelled the captain. "He had an errand to run and is running late," explained Leaftuck. "We are going to have to continue without him then," insisted the captain. Each group leader was going through their report one at a time. There were some second-hand reports of other disappearances and of some strange sightings. Just then there was a ruckus at the front door, and Ringnick burst through, panting as he went. "About time! You're late!" complained the captain. Trying to catch his breath, Ringnick gasped, "I have some news from Folda. There have been more people going missing there." "Okay, Ringnick. Moritz, what do you have?" commanded the captain. "Just an hour out of town, we ran into some locals that claimed to have seen misshapen folk marching, and some of them were strung along on ropes tied at the hands," said Moritz. "Did they say if there were any women amongst them?" Ringnick wanted to know anxiously. "We asked. They did indeed see women being strung along on ropes as well as men. They were headed towards the mountains," Moritz said, pointing to the east. "Did you go after them?" Ringnick asked. "We did try, but we were hit from the brush by some strange creatures that moved very quickly on all fours. One of our squad was seriously injured by the attack, even though we struck some well-landed blows to it," said Moritz, looking a bit puzzled. "These creatures sound like what we fought in the mountain cave," said Ringnick. "They wouldn't answer our challenges and assaulted us without cause. They killed Jekyll and would have killed others had he not saved them by giving his own life for them. We have to put together a mission to look for them." "We intend to. First, we must report to General Jackman in the morning. Then we will report to King Bachar tomorrow. He will want to know what is going on. With the General's approval, we will be able to ask for approval from the King for a rescue mission. Sounds like there are others missing. Put the word in to call back our squads and scouts from the Western Ranges. All squads put in requests for travelling supplies tomorrow. Everyone, get some sleep tonight, especially you, Ringneck. You look terrible. When is the last time you slept?" Exhausted, Ringneck couldn't remember how long it had been. "Hopefully we will travel in 2 days at first light," said the captain. Ringneck arrived home. He grabbed some dark ale and chugged it down, then collapsed onto the bed. Ringneck was awakened by banging at the front door. He could see some light pouring in through the windows. Staggering to the door, he opened it. There stood Finch and Emma. Emma stepped forward and hugged Ringneck. "I'm so sorry, so sorry. I shouldn't have let her leave alone. It's all my fault," she said, sobbing. "No, Emma, it's not your fault," stammered Ringneck. "Ringneck, there is something Emma has to tell you," said Finch. "What is it? What is wrong?" asked Ringneck, narrowing his eyes. A wave of fear came over him. It was almost more than he could bear. "Ringneck, Lena, she is pregnant." "That can't be. Why haven't I heard of this if it's true?" "She was going to tell you, but she just hadn't found the right time." Ringneck sat down and stared at the floor. The silence was deafening. "Ringneck, we felt you had to know," said Finch.